Hello friends, and welcome again to a Walk in the Garden Bible study. This is part 3 in our study of Genesis chapter 21. And we've been looking at the account of Abraham and his family there as they lived in the land of Gerar. And we saw, where King Abimelech was the king of that area, the land of the Philistines. And where we left off last time is we were looking at how the Bible told us that Isaac, they had a miraculous birth there of Isaac in their old age, and that he had, continued to be healthy. He was being provided for. He was being blessed by the Lord, and he was growing. And one of the celebrations that they had in their communities and in their culture was when a child was weaned. When he was weaned from his mother, then they would celebrate, because that was kind of like a milestone in the child's life. And so they would celebrate his maturing. They would celebrate the fact that he had been healthy and achieved that length of life, and that the Lord's hand was upon him. And so it was a great event. They would invite family, they would invite friends, they would have a feast, and they would just have, they would give gifts, and they would just have a big celebration for the weaning of the child. And so that's what they were doing. And then we saw the account where his older brother Ishmael, who was quite a bit older, had, he'd been observed by Sarah mocking, just making fun of Isaac, and kind of putting him on the spot and mocking him and chiding him, and just, having that element of pride in his life and that element of jealousy, and the fact that, he was just jealous of Isaac. And so, we saw the account where Sarah had observed that, and she took the matter before Abraham, and basically just told Abraham that, Ishmael and his mother Hagar needed to go. They no longer were welcome in her household. She didn't want Isaac to be influenced by Ishmael's bad example. And I'm sure there was probably other things that had happened prior to this between Hagar and Sarah being, two women in the same household. And then, of course, having the relationship there with Abraham, the fact that Ishmael was Abraham's son, created a lot of animosity in the household. So Sarah had drawn the line now. She'd drawn the line in the sand. And she had made a verbatim request to Abraham that he should take care of the matter, and that, she referred to her as the bondwoman. She said this bondwoman and her child needed to go. Not Abraham's child, not Abraham's son, but the bondwoman and her child needed to go. And so we're going to pick it up there in verses 14 through 21. And here the Bible says, "And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and took bread and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice, and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle with water, and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew, and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt." So now we see here the casting out of Hagar and her son. And she brought this matter before Abraham, and he was pretty distraught about it, because this is his child. I mean, this is his child now, and it was a very grievous decision that he was going to have to make. And we talked about that last time, about hard choices in our lives. And we have to take those matters before the Lord, and the Lord will instruct us. We can't always see what's up ahead. We can't always see what the end result's going to be. And sometimes it's not always the direction or the decision that we would have made on our own. But if we listen to the leadership of the Holy Spirit, if we listen to the leadership of God in our lives, then He will show us what's best for every situation. And so that's what Abraham is going to find out here, is he's going to find out what is best, not only for his family, not only for Isaac's sake, but also the fact that, God is going to put His hand on the whole situation and give him direction. And so we see the casting out here of Hagar and her son. And it's just as Sarah had requested. That's what her heart's desire was to see this happen. She didn't know how it was going to happen. She didn't know what Abraham was going to do. She just merely brought it before him, put it in his lap, laid out the situation, and let him, take it from there. And so here we see that Hagar and her son are formally dismissed from the house of Abraham. When Abraham considered what the Lord had spoken unto him, well, then it was settled, because the Lord told him, He said, what did He say? He said, fear not. Don't worry about doing this thing, Abraham. It is going to be the best for all concerned. And you don't have to worry about your son, because I'm going to take care of him. I'm going to look out for him. I'm going to actually bless him for your sake. And not only am I going to bless him with health and with strength and with safety, but he's going to go on to be a head of a great nation. And that's what he's going to do. So he's going to prosper. Because of your sake, Abraham, I'm going to look after him and make sure that he does well. And so when Abraham had heard that, and he heard what the Lord had to say to him about the situation, well, then that made it a little more plausible for him to do. That made it a little bit of an easier pill to swallow, so to speak. And so he didn't have a problem with doing it. And what does it say? It says he got up early in the morning. He wanted to take care of this matter right away. He wanted to so-called nip it in the bud, if you will. And he just wanted to take care of business and go ahead and settle the matter once and for all. And he had peace about it now. He had peace. He had clear direction. He had clear discernment that God had given to him. And he knew it was of the Lord. It was the Lord's will. He had perfect peace about it. And so there would no longer be a problem with him doing, taking care of business. And so he got up early in the morning. And there would be no delay in the matter. What do we see? It says Abraham rose up early in the morning. Abraham's obedience to the divine command of the Lord was in haste. It was going to be done quickly. He had a job to do, and he was going to rise up early and complete the task first thing. There was not going to be any room for second guessing. He wasn't going to delay and kind of drag his feet about it and consider whether it's the right thing. No, he was going to go ahead and take care of it, and take care of it right away. And so this is how he took care of business when he got directed from the Lord. He didn't tarry, he didn't delay, he didn't put it off, and he wasn't going to second guess himself. But he allowed the directions of the Lord to supersede his own fleshly judgments. Because this wouldn't have been the way he would have handled things. I mean, he wouldn't have kicked his own son out of the house, regardless of what was going on, regardless of what Sarah had said, regardless of, any possible animosity that was going on. He would have tried to somehow have, made other arrangements maybe, and maybe provide a little more separation, but they would have still been on his land. They would have still been technically in his household, if it would have been up to him. But the Lord directed otherwise, and so that's the direction he was going to be obedient to the Lord's command. And so now the next thing we see is how he sends them out. He gets up early in the morning, tells them to gather their things together, tells them what's going to happen, tells them that they're basically, their residency there is being terminated. They're being evicted from his household. And so I'm sure there was a lot of sadness there. There was a lot of sadness. There was a lot of grievances probably being offered by Hagar about, well, why couldn't we do it this way? Why couldn't we, try to resolve this thing or work things out? Why couldn't, we just, give us a separate household to live in, maybe an apartment building down the block or something, But no, Abraham laid it out. And they were told to gather their things together, what things they could carry, basically just the meager provisions things that they could carry with them on, whatever they could put in their backpack on their back. And so he sends them out with whatever they could carry. And what does it tell us? It says he took bread and he took a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, put it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. So there was no, servants going to go with her. There was no caravan going to go with her. There was no horse and buggy, or no coach, you might say, or camel that's going to lead them on their way. Abraham has heard from the Lord. The Lord has told him that he's going to provide for him. He's going to protect them. And he's just simply trusting the Lord to do that. He's not giving him a big major cooler to take with him, a big thermos of, a big jug that's going to hold ice water. What does it say? It says a loaf of bread and a water bottle, and that's it. That's all they're going to have. And then he's just going to put it before the Lord and trust the Lord to take care of them. They wouldn't have a beast of burden to help carry things for transportation. They were going to set off on foot. And they weren't going to have many provisions. And, so was it Abraham's idea? Or was he instructed to send them out sparingly? Well, he simply was trusting the Lord. And so it is a rather sad account. The bondwoman and her son being sent off into the wilderness to fend for themselves. What does it say? It says that she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now there's a couple things we see here. First of all, this term wandering means that she really didn't have any set goal in mind. She didn't have a set direction she was going in. She didn't have a place of refuge that she had her sights set on. In other words, she really didn't know where she was going to go. She didn't know where she was going to end up. And she really didn't know what lies in her future. She just simply was going. And so that was a scary thing. And what is the next thing it's told us? It says, into the wilderness. So this is not a developed area. This is not a civilized area. There's no towns where she's going. There's no villages. There's no rest stops along the way. There's no convenience stores to stop at and get provision. There's no motels on the side of the road. There's nothing. It's just a wilderness. A wilderness where wild animals could be. A wilderness where there could be unscrupulous people, maybe bandits or so forth. A wilderness where there could be dangers along the path. There could be, snakes. There could be thorns and thistles. There could be, there could be bad weather that moves in on them, and without adequate shelter. There's just nothing. And so here we see this woman and her son, and I'm sure Abraham watched them as they went, as they got smaller and smaller in the distance. And perhaps a tear came to his eye, just thinking about sending them off like that. That's kind of a dismal thing to do, you might say. But the wilderness arena, no communication, no villages, no possibility of support or relief, no family or friends to rely on. They didn't have any kind of, you couldn't even send a smoke signal, couldn't, get on your cell phone and call somebody, couldn't, even send a page to anybody, anything like that. And it was just her and her son walking aimlessly in the desert with no direction in mind. And the stress, just think about the stress of the unknown. How could they possibly survive under these conditions? That was what was paramount in her mind, is not only for her, but primarily for her son. How is she going to adequately support her son, supply for his needs, and find a place where they can have safety? That was paramount in her mind. And so it was. Her greatest fears were realized as they traveled, as they wandered in the wilderness. What does it tell us? It says the water ran out. The water in the water bottle was spent. And she didn't know this territory. She was from Egypt originally. Plus she'd just been serving in Abraham's household. So wherever they went, she went with them. She didn't know this outer lying area. She didn't have a map. And she didn't know where the water holes were, or maybe where wells had been dug, or possibly where there was a stream somewhere. She didn't know any of that. And so when the water ran out, Ishmael had gotten sick. Maybe it was heat stroke. Maybe he was just so dried out and so thirsty and dehydrated that he was just literally sick to his stomach. He couldn't go on. And he was getting sicker by the moment. And so, Hagar was just at wit's end. She didn't know what to do about it. There was nothing she could do. She had no medications. And the primary need was water. She had no water. There was nothing else she could do to support him. He was delirious. He was faint. And he was seemingly at the point of death. And she couldn't take it any longer. And so what did it say? There was simply nothing she could do to give him sustenance or ease his burden. And because she felt the end was near, that he was doomed, and she felt helpless about it, she merely tried to provide what comfort she could. She laid him under some shrubs, and then she couldn't bear to look at him any longer. She just walked off, separated between her and him, and went off and just cried and, just was pleading before the Lord. And so that all of the prophetic messages that she had heard, and all the promises that she had heard of God, all of the good things that were supposed to lie ahead, all these now seem like distant memories. They just seem like shattered promises to her. Because nothing was going to develop or happen, because Ishmael's at the point of death. It's over with. There's nothing else she can do. And there was no reconciling these now. And in this current situation, those earlier hopes just seemed utterly impossible. She was despondent. And what does it tell us that she did? It says that she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. So she went not just a little ways off, she went a long ways off. I mean, that could have been like possibly a football field. I don't know how far a bow shot is, but it's quite a ways. And so she wanted to get, she probably didn't want to hear him moaning, didn't want to hear him groaning, didn't want to hear him crying. She just couldn't take it. She couldn't take it. She just felt like, well, and what does she say? She says, "Let me not see the death of the child." And so she lifted up her voice and wept. And then what do we notice next? God heard the voice of the lad. Not only did God hear, but then she heard an angel call out and said unto her, "What aileth thee, Hagar?" What's the issue here? Why are you crying? Why is your countenance fallen? Why are you, in such a dismal shape right now? And, so for the second time, I mean, think about it. This is the second time that Hagar is confronted by the angel of the Lord. And who was it that God heard this time? The first time he heard Hagar and her despondency that she had at that time when she was sent out from Abraham's house. But this time, does he hear Hagar? No, rather the voice of the lad. God hears the lad. Ishmael's cries had come up before the Lord, and God heard, and he responded. And so what does the angel do? Well, he calls out to her from heaven, and he says, "What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is." In spite of being in the wilderness, in spite of being under a shrub, in spite of possibly not even uttering any actual words, God heard. He heard, it says, his cries had come up before him. And so that's just a good example that no matter what shape we find ourselves in, no matter where we find ourselves located, we're never out of the earshot of God. We're never out from under his all-seeing eye. He knows where we are. He knows our situation. And even if we were to the point that we couldn't cry out words and make actual sentences come together, God can still hear our cries. And so the angel assures her of his well-being and the fact that it is God that has heard and responded. The same God that appeared to her years earlier and met her need then, once again has heard her and meets her need now. He has not forgotten her or her son. The God of Abraham has heard their cries. And so what's the next thing the angel instructs her to do? Well, he says, "Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand. He's fine, Hagar. He'll regain his strength. Hold him up so that I can show you great and mighty things. For I will make of him a great nation." And the reminder of this promise is given. I won't let him die, because I must needs have my promise fulfilled, and it will be fulfilled because I have said it. And so the next thing we see is, how does God respond? Well, he shows her where relief is. He opens her eyes, and what does it say? It says that God opened her eyes. She could now see clearly. She was blinded before. She was looking through a dim, tears-filled eyes, couldn't see anything. Her faith was weak, but God opened her eyes, and then what did it happen? She spotted a well of water. She rushes to the well of water, fills her bottle, and gives Ishmael to drink, and he's revived. And just as Hagar was unable to see the well until her eyes were divinely opened, so it is with the soul of man. There's a well full of living water. Jesus told the lady at the well, the Samaritan at the well that time, she wanted him to draw up physical water for her. But he said, if you take of this water that I offer, you'll never thirst again, because this is living water that's eternal. And so, herein lies the spiritual principle that we're finding here in this account. That there's a well full of living water, easily accessible to all, freely given all, but unless the blinded eyes are divinely opened, man cannot naturally see it. There has to be spiritual enlightenment and a removal of these spiritual blinders that only God has the ability to do. And so when one hears the Word of God and believes it by faith, at that moment their spiritual blinders are removed. But actually, their spiritual blinders are removed when they hear the Word of God, and now they can see things clearly. And so next, what do we see? It says that she rushes to the well, fills the water bottle, gives Ishmael to drink, and revives him. And as God promised, it says that he was with the lad, giving him safety and protection. For the lad grew and dwelt in the wilderness. So because of this one moment in time, this one encounter with the Lord, and this thing that God did in order to fulfill his promise to them, then he continued to survive fine after that. He grew, he became strong, he dwelt in the wilderness. They stayed out in the wilderness, they lived out there on their own. And it says he became an archer. He became a skilled bowsman. He became a skilled hunter. And that was his craft, that was his talent. And then eventually, what does it go on to tell us? It says that Hagar selects a wife for him. And where does the wife come from? Well, naturally she went back to her homeland and got his wife from Egypt. And it says that she took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. But what is one thing that we notice here about the fate of Ishmael? Well, first of all, I wanted to point out the fact that, here is the account, the actual factual biblical account of what happened in order for Ishmael to get revived. And so herein lies the adjustment that, the Muslims have made in this account in regarding the beginnings, where they say in their account it's Ishmael who kicks the sand and performs the miracle in the fact that water just comes springing up. But according to the biblical history, it is God that allowed Hagar to see the well after the angel had spoken thusly to her. So there's a twist in Bible doctrine and Bible truth that they chose to change that narrative to formulate a new doctrine and formulate a new religion. And so therein lies even the error at the very beginning of the of what they established as the religion of Islam. But what does it tell us here about Ishmael? It says that he settled in the wilderness of Paran, which was a wild place, and it was a place fit for a wild man. It was indicative of those of this world who are born after the flesh, but have not been born again by the Spirit. What do? They take up the things of the world, the wilderness of this world, and the ways of this world. But he would survive, he would exhibit outward prosperity, because in order to fulfill his promise to Abraham, God was with him. Secondly, we notice his trade, his skill is he became an archer. It was his chosen profession. He became the sport and art of being a bowman, and kind of akin to maybe being like a professional hunter of today. And then thirdly, we see that he followed suit to his mother's wishes and took of him a wife from her own native country, out of Egypt, back to their pagan roots. It would be the result of his own mother's advice and consent in the matter. So it's kind of a sad thing that, and she could have done it for spite because of what happened with being banished from Abraham's household. I mean, she'd been under the leadership of a godly household. She'd been privy to the preaching of the Word of God. She'd been knowledgeable about the things of God and seen great and mighty things that God did, because God appeared to her even personally twice and protected him. And so you would think that maybe that would have incited or influenced her to go and choose a wife of, from that culture, or from, Abraham's, maybe outer lineage there or something. But she chose to go and get him a wife from Egypt, knowing full well that, the Egyptians weren't, that wasn't a godly nation. There was a lot of pagan rituals that went on there. There was a lot of idol worshiping, and just a lot of, things that were going to, this woman, whoever it was going to be under the influence of. And that kind of goes into the New Testament teaching there, where it talks about not being unequally yoked, because a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. And if you enter that kind of a combination, that kind of an adjoining, then it's usually, not always, but in many cases, that leaven is going to kick in, and it's going to corrupt the one who was maybe trying to live the other lifestyle. But we don't know that about Ishmael. I mean, that may have been the lifestyle he was already planning to live, wanting to live, and because of that, he may have all been gung-ho about getting him a wife from Egypt himself. But either way, it was in an agreement with his mother, and so that's where we see Ishmael at this point in our study. So that pretty much finishes up verses 21. We're going to pick it up next in verses 22 through 32. So we got quite a passage we're going to look at next time. And we're going to see how Abimelech is going to come back into the picture. And we're going to see that there's going to be some animosity there, and we're going to see some encounters there with Abimelech once again. So we hope you stay with us. We'll see you in our next lesson, and hope you have a great day. Thanks.